My nan told me stuff about her being evacuated and
Oh,
stuff.
was she?
But she told me when I was little, so I can't really remember much of what she said.
So where did she live then? In Hereford?
Yes.
Probably not if she was evacuated.
I'm not sure. She told me when I was little, but since then she's had memory loss, so but I can't ask her again.
Well, unfortunately, you see, when we get older, we all suffer from memory loss. I can remember something.
I tried asking her the other day, but she goes on. She tries to tell me, and then she goes off on something else.
Now, what do you?
Use your questions.
What do you want to ask me?
Give me my pen as well.
We're videoing it, Grandma.
Oh,
by the
are
way,
you?
yeah.
Oh dear.
So they probably won't make notes. But we'll watch it back and they'll take notes another time. Is that all right?
Is it voice?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Oh, you'll hear that, will you?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. We'll have to try to speak clearly then, so everybody can understand what
And I'm doing the National Health Service about old health and stuff.
Yes.
And
going back to when?
it says 1946.
Yes, 1946. That's right. Before that, we didn't have a National Health Service at all. You very seldom had a doctor who would go to the house before that. And if you did have to have a doctor, you had to pay for it, and it was quite expensive. So people generally tried to treat themselves. So when the National Health Service came in, we were all very, very pleased about that. It started off very well, and in those days, if you had a baby, you never went into hospital, or very rarely. So children were born at home, basically. And there was very little in the way of care from the local authority. If you were very, very ill, obviously you would go to hospital, but the hospitals were pretty basic in those days. Very different from today, I must say. Now, what else do you want to say about that? Anything?
What happened about medicine? Did you have to buy it, or?
You would have to have bought it, unless generally the men, they paid into insurance if the men were working, and they did get a few concessions on that. But if you had an accident or whatever, you would have to pay. I, in fact, fell over on one occasion, and I cut my wrist, and it was a very deep cut. And my mother had to take me to the doctors, and he charged my mother 5 shillings to put a stitch in it. But you see, in those days, there wasn't a lot of money about. And people really couldn't afford a lot in the way of medical care. As I say, in those days, you were very lucky in as much that there were beds if you became pregnant and had to have a baby. And it certainly was more relaxed over the way that they treated people.
Did they have anaesthetic, or?
Well, if you broke your arm or something like that, yes, they would give you anaesthetic, and they would set it for you, obviously, and you would then have to visit. But before that, it was a little bit chancy as to what sort of treatment you would have got at the hospital. It started off pretty well. It included all sorts of things that you could go into hospital for. There was a big call on teeth and wigs that people wanted, you see, and glasses and that type of thing.
So once it came out, did you still have to pay, or was it?
Well, it depended on your age, really, what you paid. That was the point with that. But I was lucky in as much that I very seldom had to go to hospital. But there are people that did have to go. It would depend on your circumstances. If you were working, then you could afford to pay. If you weren't working, you had no money, you see. That was the point.
So if you were unemployed and didn't have money, what did you have to just like try and
Well,
deal with?
basically, I can only speak for my family. Basically, you tried to treat yourself, really, with various preparations. That was the point with that. So you had to be pretty ill and have, you know, something really radically wrong with you before you went to hospital. Before that, if you had pneumonia, you were basically treated at home, which was that was quite a complicated affair. A lot of people would have pneumonia with, you know, colds, because people didn't have such good diets, really. We'd just gone through a war when you were living on rations all the time, and you'd have say 2 ounces of cheese a week, and a couple of ounces of butter, and a little bit of tea. And your rations, when you went for them, were in that sort of thing, because they were so little. They were so little. And I remember when we had cheese, if there was rind on it, we'd even eat the rind.
Stop you from going hungry.
There was still rationing after the war. During the war, there was quite a lot of rationing, but they began to relax things slightly after the wars, and some of the things came out off ration. I've got a little booklet here, which would probably tell you things like that. I'd have to get my glasses out. If I can pick it up, I will do so. This is wartime food that they had in here, and the sort of things you made. They weren't madly exciting, but of course you couldn't get ingredients in those days. I don't know if I can find this particular. I'll find it perhaps later on, anyhow. But to give you a little idea of what you did, you had so little, you see. You'd make sort of mock clotted cream with margarine, sugar, dried milk, and that would be that. That would be the cream that you would make at that particular time. Nothing very exciting, may I say. Pink layer party cake. And you'd make some of these things. You didn't have eggs. You'd have the reconstituted egg that you would make it with. So it was all substitutes for the food that you were eating. Not terribly imaginable, but during the war you were so short of food. I mean, the ships that went backwards and forwards with food was mainly blown up, so there was nothing much coming into the country. I think I saw during the war about 2 oranges and things like that. But it gradually became, it built up eventually as to the food. But it was nothing like the food you would have today. Not at all. Not the variety, no. What else have you got there?
That's it, I think.
You asked me a question.
Yeah, I have.
Yes.
So you were looking at the National Insurance Act, were you?
Yeah.
So you've asked about maternity?
No, not yet. I haven't asked any.
Oh, right, okay.
We've gone on to maternity a bit, but we'll carry on with that subject.
Yeah, I've got the National Insurance Act, and it says, did people get maternity leave from work when they were pregnant?
I can't say whether they did or not, quite frankly. I worked during that time, but I think that gradually came in, actually. That really did come in soon after. Because when you start a National Health Service, you're learning all the time as to things that you're doing, and you can't do everything at one go, obviously. So generally things were introduced with a gap between them as to what you would get. But when I went to work, I had to pay for an insurance stamp, which would have covered me if I'd have been ill or anything like that. But fortunately I wasn't, so I can't tell you what happened after that.
Yeah. Before the pensions were introduced, do you know what people did for when they couldn't work anymore?
Well, it was rather tricky, quite frankly. I mean, if you didn't work, if you're a man, of course, you got a certain amount, but that would have to cover the whole family, more or less, and that would depend on how many children that you had as to what you would get for that. I mean, with pensions, if your mother was a widow, and if she was over 50, you would get a full widow's pension. But if you weren't over 50 and you were younger, it would be reduced accordingly. And that still is in operation today. If you're a widow, you get so much for the children, so much for the widow, so much for the children. It depends what your circumstances are. In a lot of these things, it depends on people's circumstances. But I mean, it would apply mainly to people who had money as well. It wouldn't just be a group of, you know, poor people. It would be all over the country like it is today, really.
I have a question.
Pardon?
What happened before the pensions, though? Like, so when what Sam's been looking at is that, was it 1940?
1946.
1946 was the national insurance,
yes.
and so then pensions came. But before then, what did people do if they were old, or did they get
Well, they
money?
suffered.
They suffered.
They suffered.
Yeah.
I mean, I was born in 1926. I don't know whether that has any significance for you, 1926.
I'd done GCSE history at school, but I can't remember much of it.
Well, we're in 2006 today, aren't we?
It was the year of the general strike, when practically the whole country was on strike. And the men, there was no jobs for men. There was 3 million unemployed men. Because in those days, women didn't go to work in the 20s and into the 30s. Very seldom women worked. So the men would get something. But the point was, a lot of these people borrowed money. They went to loan sharks, which we have today, and they would come and you'd have to sell the contents of your home. And women even had to sell their wedding rings. This was before this particular 1946, before that, going up towards from 26 onwards. And there was no such thing in those days of nurses coming in to look after you. You had to look after yourself, even if you were pregnant. There was a lot of poverty about at that time. As the 30s carried on, things began to get a little bit better, and people could perhaps afford to buy, you know, sort of things that they never could before. And we got to 1939 when the war started. Well, that changed everything when the war started, because all the men called up to go in the army, if you were between a certain age, you see, and women went to work. So therefore there was a lot more money about during the war for people, but there was not a great deal you could spend it on. I mean, there was rationing of all sorts, clothes rationing particularly, and you were allowed to have so many coupons, and once those coupons had gone, you couldn't buy anything else in the way of clothing. And a heavy winter coat would take all your coupons, so you wouldn't have anything left to buy anything else. But of course in those days there was a black market, so it was possible, if you knew the right people, to buy coupons.
Did you know the right people?
No.
Yes.
There's always ways of getting around things in this country. It was called the black market.
When I did GCSE history at school, no, it's probably relevant, but we'd done a bit of that hire purchase.
Yes.
When people bought their cars and then they had to.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes, that's true. Well, hire purchase, you had to, obviously it cost you more to buy that product by having it like that, because quite frankly the interest rates at that time were quite a lot. If you bought a car, the interest rate you paid to begin with was something like 25% over and above what the car had actually cost.
Yeah.
So therefore it was quite difficult for people to find that money. But a lot of people bought like that, because that was the only way you could ever get anything.
Yeah.
That's the only way you could get anything. Unless you were lucky at that time and got yourself a job where it paid perhaps a little bit of money. It wasn't too bad. But it was always a struggle to get money together. You weren't frivolous with money. You really watched what you were spending, obviously. But hire purchase was a good thing in a way, as long as you knew you were able to afford it.
Yeah.
It was pointless taking. It's like today, people have loans, you see, and really they've no way of paying them back.
No.
It's like buying a house today, which costs thousands and thousands. And people then take on far too big a mortgage. It's not just the house you're buying, it's everything else that goes in the house, you see.
And how did people get by, like, that had disabilities and they couldn't work? How did they cope with it?
Well, they got a disability allowance. They did get it. But of course there was quite a stringent test for that, which there are today. You have to prove that you're disabled. I must say, though, that people seem to get away with quite a lot these days, which we never did.
Were there many doctors around in the area, or were there just like one?
Well, I suppose I always had a doctor. You could usually find a doctor, and you could usually find a dentist as well. It's not the trouble that it is today, but you would have to pay. You wouldn't pay your doctor, but you would pay your dentist, obviously. So with all these things, you have to keep healthy. That's the best thing. Eat healthily if you can, and if you can afford it, obviously.
Before 1946, did you pay doctors to see them? Or?
No, you had to pay.
Yeah.
You had to pay a doctor, yeah. Yes. Unless you're a man and you paid insurance.
Right.
Because the men had to pay a stamp, mainly.
Right.
Yeah, that covered the man, but not the family, really.
Yeah. And would you go, was there a doctor's surgery? Would they come to you?
I can't remember a doctor ever coming to our house. No, I can't. When my brother had pneumonia, my mother treated Peter. And it's quite tricky to have to do that. Yes, it's quite a worry. But people learned to do these things, you see, because they had to. They couldn't afford to do anything else. You had people living in the area. It's like when you were having a baby. At that time, people who were having a baby, you never had a nurse. You had just a neighbour, perhaps who'd delivered her daughter's child or something, and who knew a little bit about it, but not a lot, obviously. It was pretty basic, really, at home. I mean, all my sisters and brothers were born at home, not in hospital. But even after the war, it's difficult to get into a hospital because there was lack of beds somehow. Things don't change, do they?
Is that all your questions?
Yeah.
Anything else you'd like to ask me? Anything else you're inquisitive about? Teenagers, say.
Don't know.
Can't think of anything else that you want to say.
Not to do with this.
Okay.
What do you want to ask?
I don't know. I did have some questions in my mind, but I've forgotten them.
You've forgotten them.
They've forgotten.
If you remember, you can come back
Yes,
to them.
good, you can. Yes. Well, I hope it's given you a little insight into the health service.
Oh, quickly actually, what was it like being evacuated?
What was it like being evacuated? Well, I had some quite happy days when I was evacuated, actually. Yes, I did. It was a bit of a jolt when it first happened, but you get used to it. And as long as you've got your friends, you're happy. That was 1939. I still had 4 friends that were with me when we were evacuated now, so we're all getting on a little bit.
So did you get to stay with your family, or did you sort of get split up and then reunited again?
Well, I was lucky in as much that when I was first of all I was evacuated to a place just outside Felixstowe in Suffolk, because I was living on the outskirts of London at that time, and I went to a place called Trimley, and I was there from the 1st of September till about the following April, and it was very stressful because the Germans were coming over and bombing that area, because that's where they had all the submarines sort of stationed. So they were very interested in bombing submarines. Well, we were only just a mile or so from that.
Yeah.
So my headmistress decided it was rather dangerous. So from there I went to Colchester, which was a barrack town. Now, do you not know what a barrack town is?
Yeah.
Where all the soldiers lived, you see. And I was there for 16 weeks. And my headmistress decided, no, she didn't want her girls to be there with all these soldiers. So then I was evacuated right across country to Worcestershire. And I was there for 2 years in Worcestershire. And my mother would come down and see me, and I'd go home occasionally. So we kept, my sisters both worked in Worcester. They were evacuated too. They worked in Worcester. So I had most of my family with me. I was very lucky, really. My brother was left at home looking after himself, so my mother had to go back occasionally to see that he was all right. But he was working in London, and he was a firefighter in London, my elder brother. So everybody was doing, jobs that were connected with the war. My sister worked for the Air Ministry, and my other sister made Spitfires in a factory in Worcester. You had to do something.
Yeah.
If you had children under 10, you didn't. But if you had children over 10, you were called up and you were expected to do something towards the war effort. And I worked in the shipping office, so I was with shipping, and I had to sign the Official Secrets Act, and I was 16.
Did you find out any secrets?
Pardon?
Did you find out any secrets?
Oh, we could never talk about what we did with our ships.
Yeah.
No, they were all blown up, actually,
Oh.
in the Atlantic. We lost every ship we had. We had 15 ships, and they were all blown up. And we lost so many men, because there was about 50-odd men on those ships, mainly all killed, no survivors. I don't want to talk about that, because that might upset you, really.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, I was, 16, 17, sending out telegrams to the, their families, which was a pretty hard job to do. Yes.
Thank you.
Right.
This is Phoebe and Gemma. Hello.
Oh, hello. Sorry to sit with my back to you.
That's all right.
Now, what have you got there?
I'm doing the Education Act.
The Education Act?
Yeah,
Oh, right.
1944.
1944.
My first question is, what age did you have to be in education before the Act?
4.
4, really?
I was 4 when I first went to school, yes.
And what time did you have to finish the education?
What time did I finish my education?
Yeah, age.
16.
What happened to your education when you were evacuated?
When I was evacuated? Well, obviously, when the war started,
Yeah.
most of the schools were closed in the towns. I don't think that happened perhaps in Herefordshire.
No.
I think that probably here, because you weren't that vulnerable here, you see, but they're Birmingham, Coventry, London,
Yeah.
all those sort of places that were huge towns. They were all attacked, all blown up. Awful things happened during that time.
What kind of school did you go to?
I won a scholarship. I won the 11 plus scholarship
Right.
in 1938, and I did 1 year there, and then the war broke out, and I was evacuated. You've heard what I said, did you, about where I was evacuated to? Various places.
Yeah.
It was quite tricky, because coming into a rural area, the school couldn't all stay in one area, because we went to and lived with people, generally in the villages. So they could only take a few children at one go. And I landed up in Nightwick, in Worcestershire, when I was in Worcestershire. So we did our education there. I'll go back before that. When I went to Felix, just outside Felixstowe, we did it in a village hall. And we had curtains which separated the different classes, so you could always hear what was going on. And we were there for a few months. And then the next school I went to was in Colchester, and we actually had classrooms there. So we did very well there, but we were there 16 weeks, and then we had to come across to Worcestershire. And there was no room for us at the village school. So we did our education in a British Legion hut on the Worcester Road. And we didn't have desks, we had card tables and collapsible chairs and things like that. And we grew our own vegetables and we made our own soup. We had a big stove, you see, and there were 7 girls there, and we were expected to prepare all the vegetables for the next day, and we would do the soup the following day, and we'd sat in a row, the girls, because it was always the girls that had to do the hard work. The boys didn't do a thing, as usual. So if I sat here, the end of the row, if it was my turn the next day, I'd be up that way, looking after the soup. So we all had to take it in turns to look after the soup. That was one of our lessons for cooking. The only lesson we had for cooking.
So you did your 11 plus then?
I did my 11 plus.
So what we were looking at, that in 1944, when the Education Act came in, they said that if you did the 11 plus, you went to grammar school. So when you did the 11 plus, you would have gone to a grammar school. But
Yes.
was it paid? Did you have to pay to go to grammar school, or what was the situation?
No, but a lot of people did pay if you could afford it.
But because you got a scholarship, you didn't have to pay.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yes, you see, you could go privately, but you paid. But if you won a scholarship, you then went and didn't have to pay.
I see.
That was the point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did
But
you
they
have to
soon
go
cut
to
that
school?
out. Pardon?
Did you have to go to school?
Well, yes. I would say you had to go to school, but
Yeah.
I know to begin with, when the war started, a lot of people, there was no school to go to because the teachers had all been evacuated with the children, you see. So I know in the area where I lived, parents would set up their own small schools and go to them. That's how the parents took it on for a while. Yes, which was quite a good idea, really, because I mean you couldn't just leave children, with nothing to do. But that went on, and then gradually people drifted back home from being evacuated. A lot of the teachers went back. Some of our teachers were called up and had to go in the forces. But a lot of children went home because their parents wanted them home and the children were homesick.
Did everyone have to go to school before the Act? They did, didn't they? Did you say this?
Yes, yes.
What age did they have to go to school?
Well, I went when I was 4.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you could, if you didn't want your child to go at 4, I think they could go at 5, but I went when I was 4. I was lucky in as much as I live right opposite school. And lunch breaks, or, because we went home for lunch, but when you had your milk during the morning, my mother would come over with a couple of biscuits for me, which was rather nice. But we had a third of a pint of milk every day given to us. Yes.
Is it nice?
It was, and in the classroom, you didn't have central heating in the classroom. You had a big fire, and the teacher had to keep the fire going all day. It was the teacher that had to keep the fire going, and we had a guard round it. And then these little bottles of milk. If the weather was very cold, she'd put the milk bottles around that, so you'd have warm milk. Can you imagine? Teachers doing that today.
I've got some milk, I'll bring it in. Make a little fire in the corner.
It was a third of a pint of milk, and that was free. And it was Mrs. Thatcher that stopped that. They called her Mrs. Thatcher, Milk Snatcher. She stopped all that.
Because it was only in the 80s, wasn't it? It
Why-
was stopped.
Yes.
Why
yes.
did she stop that?
She
don't
for to
know.
cut money.
Just, yes.
She said it was
That's very
pointless.
nice.
What do you think of the benefits of children having milk every day?
Calcium, bones.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really good for you.
You see,
Because
in
we
those
used to have
days
milk
there
at
was quite a
school.
bit of poverty still, and at least the children
Yeah.
were having some nutrition. At that stage, you didn't have school meals. When I won the scholarship, our school did school meals if you wanted them, but you could take a packed lunch if you wanted, or you could go home if you had time. You could do that. Now, was there anything else on that I should be talking about?
Nope, I've answered all my questions.
All
Thank you.
I was looking at the New Towns Act, where people in bigger cities were going out to smaller
Yes.
places because of the overcrowding.
Mhm.
And I was wondering where you were in 1945 and if you were affected by it. If, like,
Where was I in 1945? I was living on the outskirts of London, actually.
oh right,
Yes.
so you were in a smaller
I
place.
lived, in fact I was born in Upton Park, where West Ham football ground is.
Oh right.
And I lived not far from West Ham football ground, actually. Yes, yes. West Ham football ground was in East Ham, actually. It wasn't in West Ham.
So
No, where I lived, the houses were pretty good, but a lot of the housing was, well, it was bombed, and quite a lot of run-down homes and that type of thing.
yeah.
And where they would clear the area and sort of rebuild. That was when these people would go to the new towns.
Yeah.
There was one not too far from us in Harlow, in Essex. That was one of the first. And a lot of people liked them. Harold Hill was one of
where
them
am
as
I?
well. Harold Hill
As a grandmother.
was one in just outside Romford where they built. And I mean, they're lovely houses, aren't they? Really. But now people have bought their own homes, you see.
Yeah. What were the health conditions like? Were there doctors available and dentists and things like that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yes. Yes.
Did you have to pay for that?
Yes, you would have to pay.
Yeah.
Not the doctor. You wouldn't pay for the doctor. Well, I didn't pay because I was paying insurance at that stage. If you paid insurance, that covered it, you see. Yeah, I mean, when you work, you have to pay insurance,
Yeah.
don't you?
Yeah.
You get all sorts of benefits nowadays, don't you?
Yeah.
We didn't get all those benefits to start off with. No.
Pay for
There's nothing else really from them because you've answered most of my questions.
With the new towns that were built, some of the stuff we were reading said that the conditions, like it was just massively overcrowding in London, and that's why Harold Hill
That's
and
why,
Stevenage
because a lot
and
of the
everything.
places, whole areas
Yeah.
had been bombed, you see.
So was
And-
it mainly because of the bombing, or was it because when they've looked at the Beveridge report, which looked at kind of squalor and all that
Well,
sort
when
of
you
thing?
think about places like Canning Town, which were sort of on the outskirts of London, main part of London,
Yeah.
the bombing there was terrible. It really was. I mean, when I went to work, used to have to go through all that. And some mornings, you didn't know which way the bus was going to go because you couldn't get there.
Yeah.
You'd have to find another route because of the bombing, you see.
Yeah.
But masses of housing was bombed. Yeah, masses of houses were bombed. Along by the Blackwall Tunnel, where the ships used to dock, it was quite a long stretch, and every one of those houses had gone.
And so those were the people that went after the new towns?
That's right.
Because they had to?
That's right.
Did they want to go?
Well, I think they were more or less forced into it, weren't they?
Yeah. No
You
choice.
see? Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I dare say, I mean, they might have found accommodation around that area, but accommodation was very hard to find, really. If you could find a flat, you were lucky.
So, like with Harold Hill, where Nana lived, so the government built the houses,
Yes.
council houses. So did they pay rent then to the council for their houses, or?
I would imagine so. I think the council took it all over.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, the first house, we bought our first
Yeah.
house, so I don't quite know what happened over
Yeah.
that. But I would say it was the council that you went back to for various things. Yes.
Because I think
that's what
Uncle
it was.
Dennis ended up buying Nana's house for her much later.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I lived on the edge of the green belt, which is where you were never allowed to build. And the houses where I lived, there was a concession through Parliament that we could use that land to build houses, but you couldn't automatically do it.
No.
It all had to go through Parliament to get it, because they wanted it for council houses. They didn't want it for private homes. But as there was a Tory government in at the time, they allowed the private people to have them. We're getting into politics here, you see.
Yeah, they need to get into politics. Yeah.
We need to know politics.
Yeah.
We don't know much.
But it was, we were quite thankful, really, even though we never supported the Tories.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
So was that all your questions?
Yeah.
Okay, shall I get the next two people
Okay.
over?
Who's next? Yeah, if you have me.
Come on, girls.
This is
Have you got any questions left about after all that?
Vicky and Natalie.
Oh, hello.
And Natalie is related to my dad's cousin
Is that so? Oh,
in
right.
Peace
Oh, right.
because that's Hereford, isn't it? So they've been looking at the Beveridge report. You know, the guy...
Oh,
Do you know about Beveridge? And,
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So they've been
Well,
looking at that.
I vaguely remember Beveridge,
Yeah.
yes.
So you got some questions?
yeah. Did you have to get a job when you was evacuated?
Didn't have to, but mainly we did do hop picking and fruit picking, but that was our choice to do that, and we were paid for it.
Yeah.
Were your family affected by the unemployment caused by the war?
No, not really.
No.
No, they all had jobs,
Yeah.
yes.
Was there any unemployment around your area? The areas you lived
What era were we talking about? Wartime?
in? It could have been around.
I mean, if
Yeah.
we're going back to 1926, which I did
Just
at one
before
stage,
the report.
Yeah.
there was a lot of poverty.
Yeah.
There was a lot of poverty then.
Yeah.
And people found it very, very difficult to live, and people were living in overcrowded houses. And generally, the health of people at that time wasn't madly good
No.
because of the conditions
Yeah.
that they were living in, and lots of people sleeping in one room. And this is why TB was so rife during that time, you see.
Yeah. Was that in your area? There was loads of people like sharing the house, or did you experience
Not-
something like this?
I suppose I was lucky in a way that we had a house, but we didn't have a whole house.
Yeah.
We had the bottom flat, and we had 2 rooms above.
Oh, yes.
And then there was an elderly man that had another 2 rooms there. So we almost had that, but we didn't have a bathroom.
Yeah.
You didn't have a bathroom. You had to, you had what we used to call the scullery. So if there was anybody bathing that went on, that's where we used to do it, and that's where the cooking was, and you know, the washing up and that type of thing. And then we had sort of just a living room where we ate, and then we had a room which we very seldom went into because it was kept for special occasions. Oh, we had a 1 bedroom down there, and then we had 2 bedrooms above.
Oh,
So
it's
we were
quite a
not
big
too
house.
badly off, yes. We weren't too badly off.
Did you take the 11 plus exam?
I did, yes,
Yeah. Did you pass?
I did.
That's where I get all my brains from.
After the war, there was like a massive rebuild of houses.
Oh, there
wasn't
was.
there? Yeah.
Enormous,
Was that in
so.
like your area? Did you?
No,
see
not where I
anything like
lived. No, we didn't have too much bombing. We had a lot of windows blown in and ceilings collapsed, but they were all repaired under
Yeah.
the war scheme of repairs, you see.
that? Yeah.
Yes.
Um,
But a lot of areas were like that.
yeah.
Whole areas were absolutely, devastated. A whole lot of them. Yeah. And accommodation was very hard to find because of the lack of housing. Once they started to build, that became much better, obviously, but that was when they started to build these high-rise flats, which wasn't a madly good idea. But it housed people, people wanted somewhere to live and they had somewhere to live. A lot of them they've knocked down now.
Did the NHS affect you in any way when it was first started up?
No, not really. I was lucky in as much that I had my son in about 1947, so the National Health Service was in operation at that stage, and I did go into hospital, which was quite good, because up until that time it was very difficult to find beds for that sort of thing, you see. Yes, yeah.
Did the National Insurance Act, that doesn't make sense.
Was it welcomed, the National Insurance Act?
When it was first introduced?
Well, like everything else, there's always controversy about these things when they first come in, but it worked pretty well, I would say.
Yeah.
Yes, I would say so.
That's it.
So when you looked at the Beveridge report, and what were the 5 giants that Beveridge identified?
Want, ignorance,
disease,
tolerance, is it?
And squalor.
And squalor.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Beveridge had identified those 5 things. So was it knowledge or ignorance? So the education would have combated
That's
that.
right, yes.
Did you see, because Beveridge reported wide-scale kind of squalor, can you remember, obviously not you, but can you remember whether you saw any of that going on? Or
in certain areas, yes.
what was it like?
Well, it was areas that you wouldn't go into,
Yeah.
quite frankly. It was. Not too far from where I lived, there was a big market, and this road ran right by the side of the railway. It went from one station to another, Queen's Road. The first part of it was stalls and shops and that type of thing, and they actually built a school there, and which, I mean, we were amazed really, but there you are, they built this school, but in that area there was a lot of squalor. There really was.
So what were the conditions like? Like, were there rats or what's...
We were never allowed to go there, so
You
I
don't
can't
know.
possibly tell you about that, but I would imagine so, very much so, yes, yes. Oh, they're absolutely poverty-stricken.
Yeah.
I've got some books at home about, pictures of this. I'd let you have them if you're interested.
Yeah, useful.
Oh no, there was a lot of squalor about, there was no doubt about that, yeah. And of course people had lots of children in those days. And, these poor kids, they had to put shoes on their feet, and that was a difficult thing to do, to clothe these children. Yeah. Oh, it's great. I mean, you cannot imagine what it was like in those days, because it's such an affluent society today. To compare it, you can't. You can't compare it in any way, really. You don't know how lucky you are, you girls.
Yeah, we do, don't we?
Well, you all have your food, you have all your clothes, you go to school, you do what you want to do. Spend your money, don't you? Yeah. You didn't have that. Well, we didn't have that, really. I mean, when clothes were rationed, you only had so many coupons, and you had to watch, how you spent those.
Can you imagine that, saying, here's your coupons, so you can have either a top or a bra? Your choice, what do you want?
You couldn't buy anything else.
Yeah.
And that applied to, if you got married, you could only have 3 sheets. So you never slept in a bed that had clean sheets. You always had one that was being slept in and one that wasn't. Everything was rationed somehow, wasn't it? I think some of these things, if you had the money, you could buy them, but you had to have the money to be able to do it. Yeah. Generally, people had to toe the line because they couldn't afford the prices of these things. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, all your questions? Right, last 2.
Oh, I've got some more, haven't I?
Watch out for the wire. Begin, Sarah. Don't worry about keys. Just do the town. Yeah, I was.
This is Sarah.
Vicky.
Oh,
and this is Sarah.
Right, come on, Sarah. Hello.
I was doing the Town and Country Planning Act, which was meant to come in 1947.
Yes.
So did the councils actually provide housing for those who lost their homes in the war?
Up to a point they did, yes. Yes, they did. But it was a question of money, obviously, and finding the land, to do it.
Yeah.
There were two very large buildings done. One was one side of London and one was the other, of council houses. And they were, say, 1 bedroom, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedroom, 4 bedroom, 5 bedroom homes. The whole range of things it was in these places. They were all council built, they were.
Yeah.
But generally the council did provide building, which they don't today. It's housing associations today, you see. Councils have actually lost that.
And were people actually able to buy the council house they were living in, like you can now?
Well, no, not really. That came in some while afterwards when you could buy your council houses. I would say probably, well, I know when Mrs Thatcher was in power, she was the one that brought that in. And that was a good thing in a way, because most of those people bought those houses and really looked after them.
Yeah.
And they got them at a reduced amount from what you'd have to pay normally to buy them.
I can read my own handwriting. Did the Act actually improve the standard of the house that were being built? Because they were meant to.
I think over a period, yes. I would say perhaps when it started, but generally they were quite good. They were good, solid homes, really.
Yes.
I mean, they didn't have all the amenities in them that you have today, obviously, but they had all the basic things that you would require.
What was the general state of the housing like before the Act came in?
Depending upon the area on which you lived.
Yeah.
Some of it, I mean, if you had an area that was affluent, it was fine, like today. Very much like today.
Yeah.
But if you've got an area where there's a bit of poverty and, a lot of children, that type of thing.
Yeah.
It's very similar to what it is today, I would say.
I think I'm out of questions now, Sarah. I was really limited.
You finished?
Yeah.
Okay. And then the National Assistance Act?
Oh, I don't know much about that. Do tell me.
It's based on a thing where the actual local authorities have to provide care and support people who have disability.
Oh, I see.
The elderly.
Yes, I'm with you.
And that's now been enforced into a duty, they have to do it. And questions are based on that. I'd just like to ask, before 1948, how was individuals who were disabled cared for?
Well, generally by their family, quite frankly. I would say always by their family, yes. Yeah.
And how did disabled individuals get the money to fund their living costs, like where they lived? And did they have to rely on their family again?
I would say so. I would say so.
Did they live independently, or did they have to live with a family?
Well, I would say they live with their family, quite frankly. Yeah, I would say that.
Would they receive education and stuff?
I really don't know. I can't answer that question. I would imagine that if they didn't do it through a school, that perhaps their family would help them, quite frankly. I would think so.
Did the government used to support disabled people before the Act came into power, or didn't they offer any help whatsoever?
I think there was a certain amount of help about, but I don't think it was ever great. I mean, even today people grumble about, lack of money if they're disabled, don't they? Disabled people were just classed like any other people, really. They weren't a group set aside by any means, no. I think if you went, there were various charities at that time. Perhaps you could get stuff to a charity like you can today.
Okay, do people with a disability or needing help with any everyday task get any form or no form of community-based care?
Today?
Or, back
then?
Yeah.
I would say very little. Very
Okay.
little. Yeah.
What politics does that sound like? Do you remember when we had all the different politics up on the wall, and there was a certain politics?
Right wing.
Yeah, it was the New Right, wasn't it? And
Yes,
that
yes.
emphasises that your family look after you because they know you best, and the government step back, don't
That's
they?
right.
So yeah.
I mean, you can't. Today, I think people are very lucky, quite frankly, because there's so many benefits today that you can get which you couldn't get in those days, obviously. But I think things have gradually improved, obviously, because people are more vociferous about things, aren't they? And people tend to complain more. People didn't complain, you see. They just put up with it. But people complain nowadays over everything, really, don't they?
Yeah.
Sarah, what difference do you think then the Act has made to people with disabilities? It's like from when, like what Mrs. Speight's been talking about, and when their families looked after them and they may get some education but they weren't living independently. What difference do you think it makes to people now?
It's giving them more independence.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Mm.
Help give them money really, and help with education because they've adapted it to their needs.
And I think the independence is a really important thing, isn't it?
Well,
Because it sounds
they have
like
their own property, their own living accommodation, don't they?
Yeah.
Yes, they do. I mean, I think today it's pretty good, quite frankly. The only problem now is with elderly people, because if you have got any money, you wouldn't get any help at all if you went into a home.
Yeah, it's like a system now, and it's if you're under a certain amount of money,
That's
really
right.
careful.
I don't know what it is. I know if you had over £19,000,
Yeah.
you wouldn't get any help at all. I don't know whether that's gone up or not.
Yeah, my nan's
recently.
going for that at the minute.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So therefore, if you had to go into a home, you would have to pay full cost, which is a lot of money to go in a home. It is. And I think that's something that they will have to work on in some way, the government.
Yeah.
Because it's an ageing population, unfortunately. And if you haven't got any money, you're going to struggle. And our pensions are not madly good.
My grand's always complaining about that. Every time you see her, she's like, oh, pension's not really enough, I can't afford my own telly.
Oh, that's
she even
terrible.
rents her telly.
Oh, does
I
she?
feel so sorry for her. She's like, oh, I really like my
well,
own
if
telly.
they only have a basic pension to live on, I mean, it's not a lot of
It's very
money.
tempting just to buy her one.
Oh, dear.
I might get her one for Christmas just to keep her quiet.
But there's a lot of people like that, unfortunately.
Because I even gave in and bought her a video player a couple of years ago because she was complaining there was nothing on the telly.
Oh. Well, at least she's got a bit of help then, hasn't she, with things? That's good. I think you've got to think about elderly people. You really have.
Any more questions?
No, that's it for me.
No,
Oh, great.
Think.
Oh, well,
done.
it's all been a pleasure. I hope it's been of some interest, what I've told you.
Of course it is.